Hello, hello, and good morning, friends. My name is Percy Turner all day today, and we have about an hour. So I'm joined today by Zane May. Both of us work for the Community Engagement Institute by way of WSU, and there's a lot to be said about those wonderful relationships. This is our Rise to the Challenge series. We're going to be talking about an appreciative framework that kind of hugs around a bunch of trainings that are coming up over the next month or so, if I remember correctly. This is the first one of those trainings, and it is about using self-talk as an appreciative framework. I'll kind of talk you through that. The good news is it's only an hour, right? So you're going to hear me do a lot of yapping for about an hour. By the time you start getting sick of me talking, it'll be over, so you'll be fine. The bad news is this is a dense topic, and I only have an hour. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of an introduction to me, and then we're just going to get to work. Okay? This is going to go faster than it ought to, and there's going to be less interaction than there ought to be, but it's because we have somewhere around 60 people in here and we have about an hour. Okay? So I beg your forgiveness in the beginning. The first thing I'll tell you is that both myself and Zane are master's level social workers. Zane is currently licensed. I am not currently licensed because of COVID and some other things, but we're both very, very passionate about the social work view of things. And so we're going to be kind of looking at this from a lens of mental health and mental wellness. Okay. But we have some work. We have some work to do. If my, hello? If my computer remembers that it's a computer. There we go. So, okay. The big thing that we're going to talk about is where self-talk comes from. So I'm going to ask you a question, and I really want you to internalize this. If you'd like, you are more than welcome to answer in the chat. Just know I won't be able to respond to everything, but know that your answers will be recorded in our chat. And if you are looking for that or for further conversation, please talk to myself or Zane. We'd love this. So the question that I have for you, it's a very simple question. If you supervise people or if you currently have a job, how would your employment prospects look if you talked to other people the way that you talk to yourself? So think about how you internally treat yourself. If you treated your team like that, what would your team be like? If you treated your family like you treat yourself, what would they be like? Like, think about the inner voice that you have and how you talk to yourself and the words that you use and the phrases that you use and how that is different from how you typically talk to people in the outside world. If you use that voice that you have when you self talk to other folks, would your life be the same or different? And if it would be different, how? Right? So I want you to kind of keep this in mind. We already have some people responding. Look, Chad, they would all quit or fire me. I know Chad. I love Chad. Chad, hello. I both know and love you. And also, I don't want to fire Chad. I don't want to quit Chad, right? And I can't believe because I know Chad is an incredibly well-meaning and gentle person, right? And so knowing this, I know so many amazing, wonderful people who are that way to the outside world, but they are not that way internally. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. How do we take that wonderful appreciation that we throw out and keep some for ourselves? Felicia says, recommend therapy. Carrie Tucker says, starting off with deep thinking. Yeah, hi, I'm Percy. This is what I'm the deep thinking guy, I guess. Josh, good morning. Hello. Jessica agrees with Chad. Georgina says the team would be angry a lot and probably cry and laugh a lot too, right? So the thing that we're going to be talking about here is where our self-talk comes from. Where is it rooted? Because I can't ask you to change something that you don't know the basis of, right? So we're going to first talk about this. Self-talk preserves who we think we are, and that's a very important thing to note. It is not who we are, it is who we think we are, or in some cases, who we think we have to be. And now we'll get there. So there are three major elements that feed into the story that self-talk props up. The first one is events, right? And we could go, if you talk the way that you talk to yourself, the way that you treat yourself, if you trace them back in your history, you're going to trace them back to specific events. Right. I hear people say things like, I hate public speaking. I can't get up in front of crowds. When I talk to them about why, they usually have an event for me. Right. I was in a spelling bee when I was in the second grade. I was asked to spell relationship. I spelled it wrong in front of everybody. Somebody laughed. I felt more embarrassed than I've ever felt in my life. Ever since then, I have absolutely refused to be on stage. Right? There's an event there that has taught me something about myself. Another one, maybe our emotions, our feelings, right? And so there's many examples of very strong feelings that we have experienced. They may be feelings of loss. They may be feelings of accomplishment, right? I know that I'm really good at public speaking because the first time that I was ever on stage during a show, I changed some lines and it made everybody laugh, and it was the most incredible feeling I've ever had. And so that's when I knew that I needed to do something like that in my life, right? And then last but not least, we're talking about relationships. And we're not just talking about romantic relationships, right? We're talking about family relationships. We're talking about the relationships we have with our parents, the relationships we have with our children, the relationships we have with our classmates, right? And sometimes the relationships we have with ourselves. And I'll kind of dig into that here as we continue along, right? But at the end of the day, we're looking at a giant story that we tell ourselves about who we are, and that is consistent of these three things: big events in our lives, big feelings we've experienced, and important or impactful relationships. So, I'll give you a really simple example of what I call the self talk cycle. So check this out. Wake up. I wake up usually, because I'm old now. I wake up somewhere between 4 o'clock in the morning and 6 o'clock in the morning every morning. Doesn't matter what time I go to bed. Between 4 and 6, I'm up and at 'em. I'm not happy about this. However, I wake up in the morning. I stand up, I stretch, I go to take my first step, and my pinky toe rams into the side of the nightstand. Anybody else have this problem? Or you stub your toe and that you get that shudder and you make that noise that you can't reproduce, right? So that external event happens. My brain interprets that event. Now, your brain can interpret that event in many ways, right? You might interpret that event as this is the worst thing that's going to happen to me all day today. Thank God I got it out of the way. Now I'm ready to go have a good day, right? You might do this as this is another thing that's trying to get me down. I have to persevere through this like I persevere through everything else. Or you'll do what I do, which is, of course, I would ram my foot on the side of the bed today. Of course, this would happen to me. This always happens to me, right? So I interpret the event, I feed that into the info that I already have. And the info that I already have is that anything that can go wrong for me will. So that's why I interpret it in this way of course, that would happen to me this morning, right? This day is just destined to be a terrible day. I've been awake for 4 seconds and I've already experienced excruciating pain. Thanks, life, right? And then I reinforce the story. This is why, if you think of yourself in a certain way, all the data in the world, if you think of yourself as somebody who's shy, I can show you points where you were brave. You will not incorporate that into your story. But anytime that you fail to speak up, you'll incorporate that into your story. The same thing is true when you have a truth about yourself. All the data in the world doesn't change the way you think about yourself, because you choose what data you feed into your narrative. So, whatever story is present, you are going to look at things in that way, right? I'll give you another really quick example, then we'll move on. Anybody here ever bought a new car? You buy like a blue Mazda or something like that? When you buy a new car, one of the wonderful phenomenon that happened is you start seeing blue cars everywhere, right? You start seeing the car that you just bought. And your brain goes, oh, everybody must have bought these. Everybody got these new cars. I got a new car. All of a sudden, everybody's got the same car. No, that's not true. What it is now that you have this thing and you look at it, your brain begins to recognize it other places, right? So, in the same way, when you have a narrative, when you have something that you are choosing to put into your story, you will see it in other places in life. Carol says, I hurt my little toe this morning, so I can't decide on which report to work on first. So Carol's not necessarily wrong here, right? If the story that she tells about herself is one of frustration and anxiety, then this is another reason why she can't make a decision. And so that's what will filter into her story, right? So let's keep going. So this doesn't just exist in a personal space, right? There's some really special and specific significance of the story that we tell ourselves as it takes on professional meaning. So the idea here is as you go through your training today, I want you to really think about what you do, not just who you are, but what you do, because oftentimes our self talk might change based on who we think we have to be to do the work we do. So I'll give you a quick example here. Let's say you get promoted to being a supervisor. If you've never been a supervisor before, you might start thinking to yourself, I ought to be what I have seen in supervision. Or I ought to be the opposite of the terrible supervisor that I've had in the past, right? But you start telling yourself that now that I'm in a different space, I might need to be a different person, especially if you are promoted from within. I was just talking junk about the supervisor with the people on my team. Now I'm their supervisor. I need to be a different person. I can't be the same person that was just kikiing with them in the office, right? So I have to start changing that story that I tell about myself in order to accommodate this success. And so this is one of the reasons why, and we have a list of trainings around things like communication and how we view ourselves. And one of the things that I particularly push back against is the idea of faking it till you make it, right? Because even that, what you're telling yourself is, I'm not worthy of the story I want to tell about myself, so I'm going to pretend. And that gives way into imposter syndrome and all this sort of stuff. And if you want to know more about that, please email myself or Zane. I'd love to talk you through it. But defeating imposter syndrome is real and you can absolutely do it. But one of the things you have to do is embrace your understanding of self talk. So, why do we do this? What is the point of our inner voice? Why do we call ourselves idiots when we mess up? Why do we tell ourselves we're going to fail before we try? Why do we pump ourselves up before we go into a big meeting? Like, what's the point of all of these things? Self-talk has some different elements here that I want to be very clear about kind of discussing and talking through. Our inner dialogue protects the story that we tell. You are a collection of events. You are a story. And you tell yourself this story and you reinforce this story with everything that you experience. So a lot of that inner dialogue supports that who do you think you are narrative. Have you ever been in a space? Let's use an innocuous example. Let's say you're shopping and you see an outfit, you see a shirt that is beautiful, has all the right colors, it's sitting on the rack perfectly, and you look at it and you touch it and you tell yourself, that's just not me. That shirt's just not. It's beautiful, it's wonderful, it's affordable, but it's not me. What does that mean? What are you that you're telling yourself you can't wear this particular piece of clothing, right? This idea of who do we think we are, it extends to everything, how we present ourselves, the words we use, the actions we take. All of this sort of stuff comes from this narrative of what we tell ourselves we are. And that leads us into the second element here of self-talk maintains identity. So you might hear it as a little voice in your head, right? The idea of the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder, or if you're somebody who's in that kind of social media era, the light Kermit and the dark Kermit kind of thing. There's also this idea of virtue ethics, and I'll be very, very quick about the concept of virtue ethics. It's a big thing, but basically, virtue ethics is about every decision that you make contributes to you becoming someone who can make those decisions easier. So, the telltale thing, a wallet drops on the ground, you have three options. You can take the wallet yourself, you can leave the wallet alone, you can go find whose wallet it is. And the idea of virtue ethics is that whichever one you choose, it will help you become the person who does that more. So if you take the wallet for yourself, that's your first theft, and it will make stealing things easier. You will begin to rationalize making that decision easier every time you make it. You will begin to rationalize it more. If you are the person that leaves it alone and it's not your problem, you will start to rationalize that kind of neutral behavior more and more and more. Every decision you make leads you to rationalizing further decisions of that type easier, right? And then last but not least, what makes you ashamed and what makes you satisfied also lives in the story that you tell yourself. Right. So there are some things that you do that you know you're very good at before you even start. Right. This is part of that story that you tell yourself. There are things that you say, I could never, it could never be me. I could never do this. Well, what data do you have? Right. It's part of the story. So again, listen, we're cooking through this, and I apologize for that. If you have any questions or concerns, hold it till about 2 slides from now, and I'll pause and we'll kind of entertain anything that I've missed or anything you want to know about. So the other thing I want to, self-talk is about protection, and there's a double-edged sword here, right? Self-talk has a lot to do with the following things, both change and risk taking, right? We don't like change and we don't like taking risks because self talk maintains a status quo. Even if that status quo is terrible, right? Even if we don't like how we are, self talk isn't concerned with what we like. It's concerned with what is normal. So if we normalize ourselves being taken advantage of or not standing up for ourselves, we can be berating ourselves internally, saying, I should have spoke up in that meeting. I know the answer to this and I should just stand up and say it, but I'm not the kind of person that does that. Even though it would be better for me, it would be better for everybody around me. That self-talk is not concerned with any of that. It is concerned with preserving the story that you tell. You tell yourself that you cannot do something, then that's what your self-talk is going to rally itself around, right? So it maintains the status quo regardless of whether it is helpful or hurtful. Self talk protects the story you tell, it does not protect you. And that's why a lot of our self talk is hurtful in nature, which is why that first question that I asked, what would it be like if you talked to other people the way that you talk to yourself? Nobody said I'd be getting high fives all around. Nobody said people would love me, right? Everybody said, "Oh, I get fired. Oh, that's no, no, no." Right? I'm looking at those of you who have your cameras on, and I saw some visible reaction of like, "Ooh, no." Right? Why is that? Because we accept that we're not very nice to us, even if we are nice to other people. And some of the most compassionate people that I know professionally are in this room. And they can tell you they're not as compassionate toward themselves. So this to me is wonderful data that says self-talk is not about protecting you. It's about protecting the status quo. And if you want to challenge that, if you want to change, if you want to take a risk, you have to fight the story that you tell. And so we're going to get into how you start to do that, right? Before we get into how you start to do that, are there any questions, concerns, or contentions with the stuff that I've said so far? I know that we're cooking along. We got about 40 minutes, and I want to make sure that I give you as much information as possible. So you tell me. Nope, Chad says keep cooking. I appreciate you. You have no idea. I appreciate you. There's 86 people in here. Do not be the person that has a question burning in your mind and then says, "Well, I shouldn't." Don't do this to me, Carol. We're not going to talk about cooking right now. Don't be the person who has a question who refuses to, because that's you're not the person who stands up and stands out. That's exactly what you're here for. Okay. All right, so let's get into how we start to challenge. So, what I typically do in these trainings is I give people a lot of information, and then the question becomes, okay, so what do I do about it? So, let's say you buy into my ideology that self talk is about the story you tell about you. How do you change that story? The first thing you have to do is figure out what your story is. Trying to change your self talk without addressing the story is like attacking symptoms with over with ignoring the disease itself, right? So the concept here is, if you've ever been in a conversation, you say, I'm really sad, and someone says, have you ever thought about not being sad? Yes, I think about not being sad all the time. But because I don't know why I'm sad, it's hard for me to just not be sad, right? I have to have some level of understanding of something deeper than my feeling. So I have to have some understanding that is deeper than just the words that I say to myself, right? I have to figure out where those words are coming from, and I have to challenge where those words are coming from. So I'm going to give you an example. This example, while very, very specific, totally isn't my own self-talk that I just put on here because it was the easiest way to make this training make sense. My big story, the big thing that happens in my mind, or I mean, sorry, the big thing that happens in the example person's mind, that's totally not me, is I eventually mess things up. Things are going to go bad for me. I'm eventually going to screw it up. No matter what's good, no matter what good is happening in my life, don't get too comfortable because I'm going to mess it up. Right? So, what the self talk that comes from that story might look like is the good things that I experience aren't real. They'll eventually go bad. So I can't rejoice and I can't stop and I can't celebrate. I have so many people who say things like, oh, why don't you just sit back and enjoy life? Enjoy what? I can't enjoy because it's going to eventually go bad. Right. So there's no sitting back and doing any of that. That's the story that I tell myself. Another element of self talk that exists here is if I do something good, it isn't good enough. I immediately have to get back to work. I immediately have to do something bigger. I immediately have to top that thing. I can't just sit back and say, I did a good thing. I have to, it could have been bigger. It could have been better. It could have been faster. It could have been more thoughtful, right? So I never have space to slow down or stop. There is a really, really amazing example of this that I'm going to try and kind of cut into a smaller piece. There's a gentleman by the name of Will Smith who he wrote a book, and he was talking about this book that he wrote, and he talks about when he was young, he and his brother had to build a wall in the basement of his father's business. They had to build this wall that kind of sectioned off, and so it was a brick wall. And so his father said, um, I know that this seems like a lot of work. Your job isn't to build a wall. Your job is to lay the perfect brick. That's your job. That's the only thing you need to be concerned with. So you get your materials, you get your tools, you measure and you make sure that you have the right amount of everything, and you lay that perfect brick. And once you lay that perfect brick, it proves to you that you can lay the next brick perfect. And so Will Smith uses this analogy throughout his entire life. He is on Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. He is one of the most recognizable celebrities in daytime television, or in primetime television. And the only thing that he can think about is what am I going to do next? What's the next perfect brick that I can lay? So then he starts getting into movies, and he becomes an action star, and he's part of Bad Boys, and he's part of Men in Black, and so then he's an action star, and people are starting to think of him in that way, and people are starting to, what's the next perfect brick? He never sat back and said, man, I've done something that 95% of the world hasn't ever been able to touch. He's still thinking about what's the next thing that I can do? How can I make people take me seriously all over again? Right. And I forgot to even mention that he was a very successful rapper before he was an actor. Right. So in each thing that he got into, no matter what the success was, he's not thinking, oh, I'm successful. He's thinking, what's the next brick? Right? How often are you holding satisfaction from yourself, thinking, well, what's the next thing that I'm going to do? Because I can't get caught up in this. This doesn't define me. My imperfection and overcoming that imperfection is what defines me. So I got to find another thing to prove to myself that I'm overcoming, right? The next thing and the last thing that we'll talk about in this regard is the self. It's may manifest in the idea that you could have done or be doing more, right? You work yourself to the bone. You're a provider, you're a mother, you're a father, you are a brother, you're the perfect son, you're the perfect daughter. You also work very hard, but in every one of those arenas you could be doing better. The hallmark of all of those arenas that you're a part of is that you could be doing more. right? If you fail or if something goes wrong or something that goes awry, it's not the system's fault. It's not other people's fault. It's because you weren't anticipating, right? And you've said, and I've heard people say, even if it is the system's fault, I should have expected the system not to go well. I should have expected this to happen. And I should be able to pivot better, right? You will find a way to put responsibility on yourself, even when the responsibility cannot be yours. Right? These things are how that I eventually mess up. Big story might manifest via self-talk, right? So I'm just giving you some examples of what this looks like. And so in some cases, you might not even know what the big story is. You might be in a space where the self-talk is so dominating for you, you don't even remember where it comes from, right? So if you're in that space, then I encourage you to do some reverse engineering. Look at the self-talk and connect it. Connect it to, and we'll go back, right? The big things that you're looking to connect it to is events in your life, feelings in your, like big feelings that you've had, or relationships that you've had, right? And I can spend a whole lot of time giving you some examples of these things. But when you look at the self-talk, if you're thinking, if you're constantly telling yourself you can't relax, right? Good things do not last. When did you first learn that? When did that become the way that you talk to yourself or the way that you saw good things? Was it an event that happened in your life? Was it a relationship that you learned this from? Was it feelings that you kind of got caught up in? Where in your life did this originate? Mike says grade school report cards. I have a story about that, Mike. But so I completely agree with you that it could have come from grade school. It could have come from the pressure that was put on you as a fourth grader when you finally got like a four. So when I went to school, I went to a Catholic school, and so we didn't have grade letter grades. We had number grades, and it was like excellent, needs improve. What was it? Excellent, satisfactory, needs improvement, failing. So four was excellent. And so if you didn't get fours on everything, satisfactory was not okay in my house. Right? Nobody breathed a sigh of release because I was satisfactory. I was either excellent or anything else was needs improvement. So I learned unless I am the best, unless I get the best mark, I need improvement. I'm not good enough. Right? So something like that, something that Mike is absolutely correct. That this could be a source of self-talk. That I could have been from the fourth grade up until now telling myself, hey, if I did something good, was it excellent? And if it wasn't, and if everybody doesn't celebrate it in that way, it wasn't good enough. Right? So I'm seeking external validation. Could it be? I mean, it could be many things. So I encourage you to do some of that reverse engineering. And it's always about finding your self-talk and connecting it to big events, to big feelings, to big relationships. So what you want to do is you want to take some of those recurring messages and you want to write them down. I'm a big, big proponent and advocate of journaling. The reason why I want you to write these things down is because writing them down puts them in a different part of your brain, number one. Number two, it takes courage to write things down because you have to look at it. You can dismiss thoughts easy. It's not as easy to dismiss something that you've written. You cement it in a different way. So write it down, listen to your reactions when you read it, listen to your reactions as you're writing it, and then try to associate memories, feelings, things like that. Go back in your mind and discover when you started thinking this way, when that really took hold for you. So once we can get to this point where we start recognizing that our story is a collection of our history, of our feelings, of our relationships, we can then start to challenge. Because one of the things that we typically do is we don't necessarily question who we are ourselves. We might be in relationships, we might be in political situations, we might be in professional situations where we question whether what we're doing is right or not, but we don't necessarily question the core of who we are because we don't see it as something to be able to be questioned. Right? So this, what I'm trying to do is put you in a space for you to recognize that the story you tell yourself may not be a perfect story. It may be something that you can extract some new learning from and challenge. And that's what you need to do in order to change self-talk from something that is not appreciative of you, which we've established in the beginning of our training, to something that is more appreciative of you. So here's where we start getting into that appreciative framework. Every story has two sides, right? It has the story of you has two sides. So there's pride and shame. And pride's not a bad thing. I want to be very clear about this. Pride worship is a bad thing. But pride in and of itself, not bad. Being proud of yourself, not a bad thing. Okay? So in that regard, what are some things that you're proud of yourself for being? I've gotten you started here. I'm hardworking. I'm capable. I'm able. I'm independent. I'm strong. I'm bold. I'm loyal. I'm kind. I am generous. I am compassionate. These things are things that we tell ourselves that we're proud of us being. I lean in to those things. I lean into being hardworking. I lean into being capable and independent and strong and all those things, right? And in some cases, and I promise I'm not talking about you, I know there's been a couple times where you've been like, you're in my head. I'm not. I don't know you. We don't know each other, right? However, sometimes the reason why we're so hardworking is because we know in our heads we're unworthy. And if we're going to beat being unworthy, if we're going to beat that part of ourselves, we have to be overly hardworking, right? We have to be overly independent. We have to be overly strong because we know that we're unworthy. We know that we're hurting. We know that we're a fraud. We know that we're invisible. We know that we're negative. And so if we can beat this at all, it's going to be by forcing this idea of all of the things that we're proud of ourselves for. But underneath it all, this is actually we're trying to fight against, right? So we're trying to lean into this positive space while really holding and exalting the shameful parts of us. The reason why I work so hard is because I know I'm unworthy. So I'm just trying to prove my own worth, right? This is a negative, and this is one of the reasons why this self-talk, the good thing isn't real, because I'm trying to be worthy. I know I'm unworthy. See how that language is different? I'm attempting to be the positive thing. I know I'm the negative thing. So anything I do is eventually going to go to negativity because I know the negativity is real. Everything else I do, I'm just pretending. I'm just throwing positivity out there, trying to be what I know myself. I know I'm the opposite, right? So this is why I'm trying to expose the idea here that we need to challenge this story so that we can lean more into the good things that we are capable of and we can kind of unstick ourselves from the shameful things. Because when people talk about the good stuff, we talk about that in terms of like a temperate, we are very temporary. We're temporarily prideful, but we're always unworthy, right? We're temporarily able or independent, but we're always a fraud or a failure or a, right? So we're trying to get away from that. So here's the framework. We need to cultivate some compassion. Compassion needs to be the center of all talk, especially self-talk. I guarantee you're a compassionate person. This isn't the first time you've heard that phrase, right? Some of you internally rolled your eyes and groaned. Ah, here we go, compassion, right? Yeah, but we're talking about compassion for yourself. So we're not talking about pretending that somebody who's bad at something is really good at something to give them a little bit of a push. We're not talking about mentoring. We're talking about applying these principles to yourself, which you deserve. Right? Fran says, question, when our self-talk starts to say, I want to be instead of I am, is this the point to challenge? So if your self-talk starts to say, I want to be, ask your self-talk and really think about instead of what? I want to be brave instead of what? right? So you're starting to challenge by saying, I want to be something other than, but you're still cementing the what I am, right? So I want to be outspoken instead of quiet, but I'm telling myself I'm quiet. Right. So we have to experiment with that a little bit differently. And we're going to talk about that. Actually, this is perfect because you're running right into what we're getting ready to talk about. Right. So what we want to challenge isn't what you want to be. I love that. And I want you to hold that. But I also want you to think about not putting this idea of you reinforcing the thing that you're saying that you are. So I want to be this. That means I'm not that. I want to be brave. What you're telling yourself is, I'm not brave, but I want to be. So then what are you really saying that you are? Right? So we're right there. I hope that answered your question. If it did not, please follow up and we'll keep going. Okay, great. So cultivating compassion is at the center of all self-work. Here we go. What we're doing is we're looking at it from a paradigm of honesty plus intention plus forgiveness. And here's the thing. When you do this work, one of the things that I see that fuels regression is when you start taking this work into yourself and you start really feeling it make a change. One of the biggest things that people feel is regret because they say, I should have did this 10 years ago. I wish I would have known this when blank was happening. I wish I would have done this. Man, I should have been doing this forever ago. I should have been doing this when I was a kid. I wish that the kid who was getting those grade school report cards had this conversation. And you start to feel shame that you didn't do this sooner, that you didn't get. So forgiveness is a big part of this. And we're going to kind of keep, I'm going to keep hammering this. The first thing, however, and I'll tell you, if you've ever taken any of my trainings before, this is one of the things that I talk about all the time. Honesty, and I'm talking about self honesty. Honesty here means recognizing that the story of you is an assumption about you that you've been trying to prove to yourself your whole life. You have assumed you're a certain way. And this is why, if we go back to that cycle, so if we go back here to the very beginning, we get an event. We interpret that event. That event can be interpreted many, many ways, but we interpret it a very specific way so that we can feed it into the story of ourselves and prove the story correct. You have been proving to yourself that you're a specific way for the majority of your life. And if we get to the bottom of that, what that means is at the very core of you, the story that you tell yourself might just be an assumption. So that very beginning part, the first step, is being able to recognize that the story that you are telling yourself that you were upholding might not be true. And you, if it's not true, then you have the power to challenge it. Who you are and how you treat yourself is not set in stone. But the way that you treat yourself and the reason why we talk about self-talk protecting the story that you tell and all that sort of stuff is to get out of, to get away from this idea, which is why change is hard. Because if I change this, then I might not know myself. This is the big fear, right? If I take the story that I've been telling myself for years and I throw that away or I challenge it, what am I left with, right? The next part and what you're left with is the ability to be intentional. The next part is intention. There are two sides to every story, that pride and shame. So think about which your self-talk is bolstering. And that goes in the friend's example. Wishing you were different. Does that help you or does that cement all the things that you're not? I'll never forget, I was in a wonderful group coaching session with some incredibly emotionally available people. And one of the people said, one of my favorite things to do is to watch these like emotionally uplifting videos. Like you watch a army person get home for the first time after a deployment and you watch their dog like freak out and you watch their wife and their kids and oh my gosh, and that wonderful feeling of just pure and utter happiness. And the person right after, we're all getting ready to clap. We're all very happy. The person says, I love watching those because I know I'll never experience that. And we were like, oh, like the twist. Oh my gosh. So I love watching these wonderfully happy, beautiful things because I know that I'll never get that. Right? Which part of your story is being told? When you might be thinking that, as Fran was saying, I wish I was bolder, I wish I was braver, I wish I was these things. Is that bolstering the part of you that you're proud of, or is that bolstering the part of you that you're ashamed of? Right? And being very aware of what part of you your self-talk is bolstering. Then talking about forgiveness. Your story is much more nuanced than one conclusion, than one experience, than one set of feelings, or than one or a few relationships. Right? So, using the example that was posted in the chat, imagine if I told you, and I'm being, Mike, I want you to know that I have had this feeling too. So, this is not me picking on you. If I told you, yeah, so all of my perfectionism actually comes from the fourth grade. When the first time that I ever got on needs improvement, and the way my parents were, they were on a tirade. I got called everything in the book but my name. There were meetings with teachers. There was all sorts of things that happened in the fourth grade. And that's when I knew, that's when I determined from the fourth grade that I wasn't good enough and that I would have to pretend and I would have to overachieve in order to get love. If I told anybody that singular thing, the concept here is for the next 30 years, I am imprisoned by one experience in the fourth grade. How many report cards do you get a year? How many years have you been in school? Right? If you start to kind of break that down, this idea is you have had many, many, many more experiences than the one that you think of that broke you. But because of the way we integrate information, once you make a decision, I made a decision at that point that I wasn't good enough. Everything I experienced from that point on I filtered into that story of I'm not good enough. So every good achievement that I had, I didn't use that achievement to challenge the story. I used that achievement to say that wasn't good enough. I got to keep going, right? When I got straight A's, when I was in all AP classes, I was in all AP classes in high school. I was in all AP classes because I knew I wasn't good enough. Not because I knew I was smart, because I made the decision already. When you start getting into that space, of I made one thing so big it took over a giant part of my life. This is where shame starts to come in. And this is where we might start to think of ourselves in a shameful space. And this is where forgiveness becomes very, very powerful and very necessary. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about kind of leaning in. We're gonna talk about pushing back. So some of the pushback, and I love pushback here, is about experimentation. And the reason why I use the word experimentation is because I don't want you to think of it as a resolution. When you experiment, if the experiment doesn't work, you can drop it and pick up another experiment. You don't have to assign feeling to experiments. You don't have to say, so, when you make a resolution, anybody here ever made like a New Year's resolution? Right? You make a resolution, you say, I'm going to do this from now on. Every day I'm going to eat better. I'm going to resolve to do this thing. The first time that you fall off track, shame gets a hold of you because you said you were going to do something, you didn't do it, you're a liar, you're a fraud, you know you weren't going to do this in the first place. Why do you even make these stupid resolutions? You're wasting your time, right? You don't have the discipline that you start beating yourself up. Experiment, pushing back. One of the big ways that you can push back is push back with your language. So I'm gonna tell you a very short story. When I was in college, I took up playing pool. Love playing pool. It's one of my very favorite things. I can't do it well right now. I can't do it as much anymore. I'm completely out of practice. But for about a year, every day for hours, I practiced playing pool. I absolutely loved it. And the reason why I practiced playing pool was because my father, when I was about 12, brought me, and I didn't really get to spend a lot of time with my father. He brought me to a bar at 12 and we played a game of pool together. And he was incredible at pool to the point to where the people at the bar knew that he was like a good pool player, right? And I got to play with him and I made a good shot and everybody was like, "Oh, you know." And it was the first time that I was kind of referred to as my father's son because he was really good at pool and I did a really good thing at pool. So this is my little brain, right? So when I get old enough, I start playing pool and I get really, really good, y'all. I beat all my friends. Like people don't want to play me because I'm really good. So now it's time to challenge the old man, right? So I bring my father out with a couple of my friends. We start playing pool. The first game, he runs the table. The second game, he runs the table. The third game, he tells my friends to have a seat because he wants to play a game against me, and he lets me break and I make a couple balls. And I made 3 or 4 balls in a row. And I am 2 shots from the 8 ball. I make the last shot. I am on the 8 ball, friends. Here I am. Here it is. It's coming. Right? Carol, I'm gonna give me just a second. Let me finish this and I'll read what you're saying. Here it is. I'm gonna beat him. My father smiles at me and he says, "Man, you've done really well. This is really good." And I said, "Thanks, Pop." He said, "You're not gonna win this game." And I said, "What do you mean I'm not going to win this game? I got the 8 ball. It's right here." He said, "You never finish anything." And he went and sat down. Did I make the shot? I immediately missed the shot. And then for the next X amount of years, I told myself, I never finish anything. He was right. He's a weird prophetic soothsayer. No, he's not. He was a dude that was afraid of me beating him, right? But I wasn't able to think like that in at that time in my life. So what I thought was my father had just said some sort of super penetrating, really correct thing about me. He saw to my core and my shame and my this and my that. None of that's true. None of that's true, right? But that's what happened to me. He just psyched me out. You've ever competed anywhere? He just said something to try and psych me out. He didn't exact. I made it true, as Felicia said. I made it true, and for the next X amount of years, I made that true. I think about that all the time, right? So when I talk about pushing back, I talk about pushing back against absolute language like that. You never finish anything. Never is doing a lot of work. Anything's doing a lot of work. Anytime somebody has ever said something like that when I was in a therapeutic capacity with folks, I would say, "Well, you finished that sentence, okay?" Right? Never and anything are absolute terms. And that's not true. So let's experiment with using something different, right? "I don't want to fail" is very different from "I never finish anything," right? So what's the difference between those two things? Right? We can start once you start kind of poking holes in the argument, even by telling yourself, "I'm unworthy." You're unworthy for what? That seems like a really big blanket statement. You're unworthy for everything? That doesn't make any sense. But the way that we talk to ourselves, we don't question ourselves. We're not in the habit or in the practice of questioning ourselves in this way. So once you start kind of poking holes in the absolute language, you can start discovering what you're really talking about. And you can start challenging the story. So okay, hold on. Let me see what Carol said. "I struggled for years after losing my job in 2012. We had to utilize food banks. Sometimes the blessing of food was abundant, and I needed to preserve it. There was no guarantee that food would be available again anytime soon. At that time, I've continued and expanded food preservation since that time. Now I've been getting told in condescending tones, 'Oh, you're a prepper,' when I have all I've been doing is, going back to home canning, preserving foods. But their comments make me feel like I'm weird and they actually question myself on my efforts." So, first and foremost, Carol, the way that you treat the food in your home is not anybody else's business, right? But This is not about how other people talk to you, it's about how you talk to yourself. And how you talk to yourself is a million times more powerful than how anybody else is going to talk to you, right? We get affected by and we internalize the things that we believe. So, if you have some basis in thinking that you're the weird one, that you're the odd person out, that you then this kind of talk, this kind of discussion is going to bore itself in your mind easier, right? So thinking about you you are in a space where you have the ability to connect. I save food because I was in a food insecure place before. And I don't ever want to be in that place. And this is me taking my power back. And that's a great story to tell. And that's a really, really important thing about you that you know that other people don't. And so when they make a comment about you prepping food or that you cook and you this and you that, they don't know where that's coming from and they don't have to. What's more important is how you treat yourself and how you can allow those people's ignorance to slide off your back because they don't know, right? They have no power over how you talk to yourself. You're the person with that power. Michelle says, and thank you, Georgina. I appreciate you, and thank you, Chad, and thank you, Melina. I have no. There is very little labor for me sharing things. Uh, I'm sorry you believe that lie, said Chad. We do want to be right, even more than wanting to be better, worthy, or good, even if right isn't what we are or hope to be. I agree 100%. Michelle DeHaven, my parents would tell me that I am, quote, too smart to get things wrong. It set up an expectation that if the things I do aren't perfect, then they are failures. Oh, how can we experiment with this? How can we prove to ourselves that this story is not correct? Right? Corey says we have a training program internally that we use the idea of a quote growth mindset versus a set mindset. It is hard to use that internally sometimes. I so appreciate you. Corey, you're absolutely right. And in terms of growth, and I'll say this, I know we have about 7 minutes left. In terms of growth, I will say that learning comes from a space of incompetence to a space of competence. So, in order to learn and in order to grow, you have to recognize that being in a place where you're not perfect is good to start. There's no shame in it, there's no shame in not knowing. If you have to be perfect at everything, it means you won't ever do anything. You'll find the one thing that you're good at and you'll sit there because fear will dominate every other space because you will move from a place of competence, a place of being great already, to a place of not knowing. And nobody wants to do that. You don't want to feel stupid. It's one of the reasons why that new computer system that they introduced 2 years ago, at least half your team was like, I'm not doing this. I've been doing the old way for 14 years. I talk junk about the old way. I hate the old way, but I'm definitely not going to look stupid trying the new way because it's more important that I don't feel incompetent, right? Christy responds to Carol, this is how I felt growing up. I always had a few food insecurity, even now as an adult. I haven't. Yeah, I agree. Oh, guys. Okay, so we're close. Right? When it comes to leaning in, there's some appreciative regard elements here. What's good about your story? Not we're not talking about pride and shame right now. We're talking about what are some things that are just good about you that may be byproducts of the story. So for me, for example, I have a lot of trauma in my life, right? And one of the good parts of that is that I am unafraid to share. I am unafraid to talk to people. So a lot of what I'm doing up here is I learned how to be unafraid of certain things. And that's a good thing that I focus on and follow, right? So regardless of the other elements of my story that I'm not necessarily proud of, there are good things in my life that have come from even the bad spaces. And so how do I focus on and follow those things? How do I build comfort? How do I build confidence around parts of my story that have taught me good things? How do I not hold myself hostage around, for example, if I'm a perfectionist, chances are that means I dedicated myself to learning a lot of good stuff and I know how to learn. So perfectionism is not great, and I don't want to hold on to that. However, as I was a perfectionist, during my time as a perfectionist, I learned how to learn, and I learned how to learn really efficiently. And I'm good at picking up new stuff. How do I focus in and lean on that? How do I start appreciating that part of the story instead of focusing on the idea that if I'm not perfect, then I'm terrible, right? How do we change that language from I'm really, really good with learning? Uh, So the example that I have here is I know that I'm good with people and I know where that comes from. So how do I build comfort and confidence? I might focus on relationships during my communication. If I don't want to do something, the big way to get me motivated is to have me think of it in terms of a relational thing because I know I'm good with people and I care about building relationships. So if I don't want to do something and you put it in the context of me being able to show up or be there for people or me being able to build good relationships, I am much more motivated and I will have a lot more energy around that particular thing. I know how to talk to myself in this regard. When we talk about appreciative self talk, now we can start unlocking instead of us holding ourselves back and talking about how bad we are when we mess up. Now we're talking about how we can take the things that we're good at to unlock our own confidence and push ourselves in directions that we were previously afraid of by allowing ourselves to really dig into and tap into the great parts of who we are, the learning that we've had over the time that we spent being ourselves. Even that time that we spent beholden to a crappy story, we've learned some good things, right? So let's review and then let me get you out of here. Self talk is foundational. We all do it. Right? Who we are and who we tell ourselves we have to be is a product of and is affected by self talk. Our history creates the story we tell, and our self talk makes it true over and over and over again. And what I love what was said, I think, Felicia, I think you were the one who said it. When I talked about my example, you were the one who said you made it true, right? It wasn't true when he said it when I was in my 20s. I made it true, and I continue to make it true. And so I have the power then to challenge it, right? Uh, So, how do we do that? We exalt the proud pieces of ourselves, we forgive the shameful pieces of ourselves, and we commit to challenging the story. You are not a fixed point. You can experiment and change how you talk to yourself and how you relate with yourself. And you do that in these stages. You start with the honesty that the story that you tell yourself isn't set in stone. You get into the intention of exalting the good parts of yourself and forgiving the bad parts of yourself. And you forgive yourself for not doing this 20 years ago. And you make sure that shame never worms its way back in to your growth. And that will equal this kind of self compassion that so many people are looking for. All right, friends, you have about 2 minutes, and I am more than willing to hang out for as long as you need to answer any questions that you have. But get out of here if you have to, right? Like, so let's go. Thank you for being here with us. Yes, it's very, very eye-opening and heart-opening session. Thank you very much. I appreciate you so much. You have no idea. Um, Elsie, great training. Thank you. Sophia, thank you. Chastity, thank you. Michelle, thank you. Guadalupe, thank you. You guys are so wonderful. Thank you guys so much. We'll be talking about problem solving next time around. Again, if you have any questions, hang out and I'm here. Will there be a recording sent out?